Have you ever noticed how certain people can make an entire room tense without saying a single word? It's both disturbing and fascinating. They have this supernatural ability to make you feel they're seeing things in you that even you don't notice. And this creates a type of discomfort that no physical threat can match. It's as if they had access to a secret manual about human nature that the rest of us never received. Today you'll discover exactly how three masters of human psychology developed techniques to earn this type of silent respect that transcends any traditional display of power. Machiavelli, Gracian, and Hanfei understood something most people completely ignore. True power isn't in being feared for what you can do, but for what you can see. And more importantly, how to use this perception to create a presence that others instinctively respect, even when they can't explain exactly why. There's something that makes anyone more nervous than any direct threat. The sensation that someone is reading them like an open book. Have you felt this? That deep discomfort when you realize someone noticed something you were trying to hide. Machiavelli discovered this is the most powerful tool for earning respect without needing to say a single word. For years in the Florentine court, observing nobles, merchants, and politicians in their most subtle power games, he noticed something that would forever change how we understand human influence. The individuals who truly exercised lasting power weren't those who shouted or threatened. They were the ones who stayed quiet in corners, observing with particular intensity. As Machiavelli described in The Prince, they knew who was lying, who was scheming, who was desperate for approval or power. And most crucial, they made this clear through a gaze that penetrated beyond social masks. It wasn't paranoia or generalized distrust. It was a systematic ability to catalog inconsistencies, contradictions, and signs that revealed the true motivations behind words. The secret wasn't just in perceiving these nuances, but in making others feel they were being analyzed almost scientifically. When someone realized their involuntary gestures, subtle contradictions, and micro-expressions were being registered and processed, behavior changed instantly. The person became tense, started self-policing, lost that naturalness that allows others to manipulate situations through superficial charm or well-constructed lies. This specific form of attention communicated a devastating message. I'm seeing through your mask and you know that I know. Machiavelli transformed this ability into an art. He didn't confront people about their inconsistencies. Instead, he created an atmosphere where they knew trying to deceive him would be useless. This generated a very particular type of respect, born not from fear of retaliation, but from understanding they were dealing with someone operating at a superior level of perception. And this leads us directly to what Gracian discovered about the power of strategic uncertainty. Here's a paradox that will completely reorganize how you think about demonstrating knowledge. The more you hide that you know something, the more restless people become about how much you might be seeing. Gracian, this 17th century Spanish Jesuit who navigated among Europe's most dangerous nobles, discovered that true fear doesn't arise from certainty of what you know, but from uncertainty of what you might be concealing. It's counterintuitive, but profoundly effective. Think with me for a moment. What makes you more uncomfortable? Someone who lays all cards on the table and shows exactly what they know about you, or someone who demonstrates knowing something but doesn't reveal the extent of that knowledge? Obviously the second option, because your mind enters a state of constant alert, beginning to imagine scenarios, fill gaps with worst possibilities, assume the other knows much more than they're revealing. Gracian developed what we can call intelligent dissimulation. When he discovered compromising information about someone at court, he didn't use it as immediate ammunition, like his less sophisticated contemporaries did. Instead, he created situations where the person felt he possessed privileged knowledge, but remained in agony trying to discover the extent of that knowledge. As he recorded in Manual Oracle, the technique worked through questions demonstrating partial knowledge, deliberately incomplete phrases, meaningful looks at specific moments that generated almost unbearable psychological tension. The approach created a zone of uncertainty where the interlocutor didn't know whether to explain themselves, deny something they hadn't been accused of, confess to relieve tension, or simply try to ignore the signs. And the more the person tried to probe how much Gracian really knew, the more they revealed about themselves through defensive questions, unsolicited justifications, denials of behaviors that hadn't even been questioned. It was an elegant way of making others denounce themselves while trying to discover what you already knew. But knowing how to observe and how to conceal partial knowledge are just the first steps. To truly master human psychology, you need to understand something Hanfei decoded over 2,000 years ago in ancient China, how people really function behind their noble declarations and apparently altruistic intentions. Have you noticed how people completely change behavior when they think no one important is watching? Like that colleague who's extremely helpful with the boss but treats cleaning staff as if they were invisible, or someone who proclaims altruism but gets visibly irritated when their goodness doesn't receive the public recognition they expected. Hanfei, living in 3rd century BC China, devastated by constant wars between 7 kingdoms, where survival literally depended on predicting others' behavior, developed something his contemporaries considered almost supernatural: the ability to anticipate exactly how any person would act in practically any situation. Hanfei's revolutionary insight was understanding that the vast majority of human behaviors are governed by self-interest, even when people do apparently noble or sacrificial things. He wasn't being cynical, he was being scientific. He studied thousands of interactions in the imperial court and identified absolutely predictable behavioral patterns based on what people truly valued, not what they declared to value. As he documented in Hanfeizi, even the most virtuous individuals had motivation systems that could be mapped and understood. Hanfei's technique was analyzing not what people said motivated them, but what they consistently prioritized when they thought no one was paying attention. He observed patterns: who they chose to spend time with, what type of information they actively sought, what situations they carefully avoided, how they reacted when their own interests were threatened versus when others' interests were at risk. Through this behavioral analysis, he could map people's true value systems, creating a kind of psychological map that allowed him to predict their future choices with frightening accuracy. When you develop this capacity for deep reading, something fascinating happens in your interactions. People begin to feel you know them better than they know themselves, and this generates a very specific type of respect mixed with discomfort, because they realize their social masks are completely transparent to you. But mastering these 3 abilities, systematic perception, intelligent dissimulation, and reading real interests, is just the beginning. The next level is knowing how to respond to this knowledge in a way that demonstrates your psychological superiority without directly revealing how much you've discovered. Stop responding on impulse. That's right, stop right now reacting automatically to provocations, manipulation attempts, or psychological tests. Every time you react immediately, you're providing free information about your weak points, emotional triggers, insecurities. And worse still, you're losing the opportunity to use what you know about the person against themselves in a way that leaves them completely disconcerted. Think about the last time someone tried to manipulate you, obviously. It might have been that acquaintance who only contacts you when needing favors, using transparent flattery to soften your resistance, or the colleague who tries to dump extra responsibilities on you, saying only you have the necessary competence to execute the task. How did you react? You probably justified yourself, directly denied, or confronted the manipulation attempt explicitly, and that's exactly what they expected you to do. Our 3 masters developed a completely different approach: the measured response that combines silent perception, intelligent dissimulation, and understanding of interests in a single, calculated reaction. Instead of defending or attacking, they responded in a way that made clear they had understood the game, but without revealing exactly how much they had understood. The technique works because every manipulation attempt reveals 3 crucial pieces of information. First, that the person believes you can be manipulated using that specific approach. Second, that they have a particular need they believe you can satisfy. Third, that they chose a particular tactic among several available options. Each of these revelations is valuable information that can be used strategically. The measured response doesn't address the content of manipulation. It addresses the process of manipulation. There's a fundamental difference between these 2 approaches, and that's where true power resides. When the acquaintance who only contacts you for favors calls, instead of saying yes or no directly, you can respond, "Interesting to contact me precisely today. How did you know I had availability?" It's not aggressive, not defensive, but clearly communicates you've identified their pattern. The power of this approach lies in the uncertainty it creates in the manipulator's mind. The person can't categorize your response as acceptance, refusal, or direct confrontation. They're left in a zone of psychological discomfort where they don't know how to proceed because their initial strategy was neutralized without being directly rejected. And here's what happens next. They begin to over-explain, reveal more about their real motivations, expose vulnerabilities you hadn't even questioned. Your measured response created an informational vacuum that their mind feels a compulsive need to fill. But there's an even more sophisticated level of this art, involving controlling not just how you respond, but what information you allow to flow during a conversation. It's like a poker game where you can see other players' cards, but they don't know you can see. How would you play to maximize your gains without revealing your advantage? Because if others realize you're seeing their cards, the game ends abruptly. When you master the previous techniques, perception, dissimulation, and reading interests, you find yourself in a position of privileged information. You can read people, understand their real motivations, know how to respond calculatedly. But now comes the most delicate challenge: how to use this information to maintain absolute control of the dynamic without burning your strategic advantage. The three masters faced exactly this dilemma. Machiavelli had access to secrets that could topple entire governments. Gracian possessed information that would destroy reputations of powerful, noble families. Hanfei knew psychological weaknesses of emperors who controlled millions of lives. But all understood that true power wasn't in using this information directly and obviously, but in meticulously controlling how and when they influenced situations. The technique they developed was creating what we can call layers of strategic information. Imagine you discovered your boss is deeply insecure about their real competence in the position they hold. Instead of using this information directly through comments or insinuations, you plant small seeds that make them reach conclusions that benefit you alone. You begin casually mentioning successful projects that crucially depended on your contribution, not in a flattering or obvious way, but as natural context of other conversations. You ask questions demonstrating technical knowledge without sounding pretentious or threatening. You offer elegant solutions to problems they haven't verbalized publicly yet, but that you know deeply bother them. The result is they gradually begin to see you as indispensable to their success, but can't identify exactly when or how this perception changed. For them, it was a natural evolution of recognizing your value. For you, it was social engineering based on strategic psychological data. You didn't manipulate them, you created conditions where they naturally reach conclusions that benefit you. When you reach this level of sophistication, something fascinating happens in your interactions. People begin to feel you're always one step ahead, always prepared for any move they might make, not because you're clairvoyant, but because you understood the internal logic governing their behaviors. And this perception creates constant anxiety. Every time they plan something, doubt arises. Does he already know? This uncertainty paralyzes them, makes them question their own tactics, forces them to act much more cautiously and respectfully when in your presence. But mastering information control is just one face of this coin. The other face is developing complete immunity to manipulation attempts directed against you. Demonstrating these attempts are not only useless, but completely transparent. Forget everything they taught you about being polite when someone tries to manipulate you. Forget about giving benefit of doubt to people who clearly have hidden agendas. Forget about assuming good intentions when behavioral patterns indicate otherwise. There's a gigantic difference between being a good person and being a person vulnerable to manipulation. Our three masters discovered that demonstrating psychological immunity to manipulation attempts doesn't transform you into a cold or calculating person. It transforms you into a respected person. The big lie society sold you is that you should pretend not to notice when being manipulated to maintain so-called social harmony, that you should accept obviously fabricated excuses to avoid uncomfortable conflicts, that you should tolerate repetitive behaviors from people who clearly identified you as an easy target for their psychological games. This mentality doesn't make you virtuous. It makes you a facilitator of destructive behaviors. Gracian constantly faced this in the Spanish court, where nobles tried to use him as a ladder to reach the king, offering false promises and transparent flattery. The socially expected response would be politely declining or accepting, and then feeling used. Gracian developed a third option, demonstrating he saw through the game without lowering himself to the manipulator's level. His technique was strategic behavioral mirroring. When someone tried to manipulate him, he reflected back exactly the energy he was receiving, but in a way that exposed manipulation without being explicitly confrontational. Machiavelli developed a different approach, but equally devastating. He structured his relationships, so individuals trying to deceive him discovered that Mysteriously, certain doors began closing, certain information stopped flowing toward them, certain opportunities simply evaporated. He never confronted directly nor made explicit threats. He simply organized circumstances, so manipulators discovered that trying to use him had inevitable consequences. Not immediate, which would be too obvious, but inevitable, as if their actions created waves that eventually returned amplified. Hanfei had perhaps the most elegant approach of all. He asked Socratic questions that forced manipulators to confront their own logical contradictions. Not aggressively or hostilely, but apparently curiously and intellectually. How did you reach this specific conclusion? What evidence led you to think this way? Doesn't this directly contradict what you said last week? The devastating power of this approach lies in the fact you're not attacking the person. You're attacking their flawed logic, forcing them to defend a position they themselves know is inconsistent and unsustainable. When you master these methods of psychological immunity, something powerful happens in your social life. People simply stop trying to manipulate you, not because you became inaccessible or hostile, but because they realized manipulation attempts turn against them embarrassingly. You become hostile psychological territory for dirty games, forcing others to interact with you more honestly and respectfully. This leads us to the final level of this journey, the ability to influence others so subtly they do what you need, feeling it was completely their idea. Have you observed how a river manages to change an entire mountain's course? Not through brute force, not attacking rock head-on with violence. Water simply flows, finds natural cracks that already exist, applies constant patient pressure at points of least resistance. With enough time, solid mountain shapes itself to the path water chose. This is precisely the difference between trying to force someone to do something through direct pressure and influencing based on what you know about how that person really functions psychologically. Traditional influence is noisy and obvious. It involves heated arguments, social pressure, explicit negotiation, even bribery or threats when subtler methods fail. It's an approach that creates natural resistance, generates resentment, and usually works only temporarily. But there's a much more elegant and permanent way to get what you want from people, using deep knowledge you've developed about them to create situations where they naturally choose to do exactly what you need. Machiavelli observed this, studying how certain leaders achieved genuine lasting loyalty without needing to use force or coercion. These exceptional leaders didn't tell people what to do. Instead, they created carefully constructed contexts where people reached desired conclusions alone. It was influenced through choice architecture, not through direct command or obvious manipulation. The process works like this. If Machiavelli wanted an ally to make a specific decision, he didn't argue in favor of that decision, nor try to convince through obvious benefits. Instead, he provided carefully selected information that made this decision the only logical option available. The person felt they were exercising complete free will, when actually they were following a carefully constructed psychological path. Gracian elevated this art to another level in Spanish court. He used what he knew about people's specific vanities, hidden insecurities, and undeclared ambitions to create completely invisible incentives. If he knew someone was fundamentally moved by need for public recognition, he created situations where that person would gain exactly the type of recognition they desired by doing precisely what he needed done. The brilliance of this approach is that the influence target not only does what you want, but genuinely feels it was their idea. There's no subsequent resentment, no sensation of having been manipulated or used, because technically the person chose freely. You just organized psychological and environmental variables, so the choice that benefits you was also most attractive and logical for them, considering their personality and value system. Hanfei understood that trying to go against a person's fundamental nature was complete waste of energy. It was much more efficient and elegant to understand exactly how each person functioned psychologically and then create flows directing their natural energy where you need it. This requires a level of psychological understanding that goes far beyond superficial. You need to know not just what the person consciously wants, but why they want it at deep emotional level. Not just fears they admit having, but psychological origin of those fears. Not just ambitions they publicly declare, but fundamental emotional needs feeding those ambitions. When you master this law of indirect influence, you completely stop trying to convince people through rational arguments and begin creating realities where their decisions naturally align with your objectives. It's the difference between pushing a stone uphill and creating an incline where the stone naturally rolls in the direction you want. And this brings us to the convergence point, where all these abilities integrate into a single presence that fundamentally transforms how others perceive and interact with you. We've reached the moment where all pieces of this psychological puzzle connect in a symphony of subtle influence, where silent perception, intelligent dissimulation, reading real interests, measured responses, information control, immunity to manipulation and indirect influence merge into a single aura that makes people think very carefully before attempting any psychological game with you. What most people don't understand is that subtle psychological mastery isn't about becoming a cold, calculating or manipulative person. It's about becoming someone others instinctively respect, even when they can't explain exactly why. It's about developing a presence that communicates competence, sharp perception, and unshakable integrity without needing to proclaim or demonstrate any of these qualities, obviously. The three masters discovered that when you integrate all these psychological laws, you develop what we can call natural authority. People simply assume you know what you're doing, that you see things they can't see, that you have access to levels of information and understanding they don't possess. Not because you bragged or demonstrated superiority, but because your presence communicates this subliminally. First element of this transformation, your body language automatically changes. When you truly understand people around you at deep level, you completely stop having defensive or anxious micro-reactions. Your movements become more deliberate and controlled. Your gaze becomes more direct and penetrating. Your pauses in conversations become more comfortable and loaded with meaning. This happens naturally, without conscious effort, because you're no longer operating based on insecurities, assumptions, or need for external approval. Second element, your conversations gain a completely different quality. You ask fewer obvious questions and make more precise observations, demonstrating deep understanding. Your responses become more concise, but each word carries weight and meaning. People begin paying much more careful attention to what you say because they instinctively perceive your words have real substance, aren't just social noise. Third element, you develop a kind of sophisticated emotional economy. You completely stop wasting energy reacting to minor provocations, explaining obvious things, or trying to impress people who don't deserve your effort. Your energy stays reserved for situations and people that truly matter. And this creates a perception that when you deeply engage in something, it's because it genuinely merits your attention. Fourth element, people begin behaving fundamentally differently in your presence. They become more honest, more careful with what they say, more respectful of your time and attention, not because you demanded this treatment or created explicit rules, but because your presence naturally communicates that childish games and obvious manipulations simply won't work. Hanfei described this state as a form of leadership that emerges organically. You begin exercising influence without apparent effort, because you created a psychological gravitational field where people naturally align with your expectations of civilized and respectful behavior. It's not intimidation, it's magnetism based on real competence. The final result is you become that type of person others hesitate to disrespect, even when you're not physically present, because they know you see them clearly, that you understand the games they play, and that you possess psychological sophistication necessary to handle any situation in a way that leaves them at clear disadvantage. It's genuine respect, based on real competence, not fear or forced submission. Now you understand how three masters of human nature created methods to earn deep respect through superior perception and psychological sophistication. These aren't techniques to manipulate or dominate others, but to become the type of person who naturally commands respect through genuine competence and deep understanding of human condition.